Good evening. I'd like to call our regular business meeting to order and ask the treasurer to call the roll.
President Baker.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Here.
Vice President Cole. Ms. Gibbs.
Here.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Peretti.
Here.
Ms. Reyes.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And now I'd like to ask Ricardo Felix from South High School, he's a senior, to come forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Felix. Well, thank you, Mr. Felix. Thank you very much. Member of our External Monitoring Committee. Appreciate your service. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Seems like just yesterday it was spring and there were flowers, and now we're raking leaves and getting ready for Thanksgiving, so how time flies. Regardless, thanks for being here tonight. I'm going to briefly read through the agenda so we know the business before us this evening. We'll take public comment after we adopt our agenda. We'll then hear our executive reports. We'll then take up board matters, after which we'll contemplate our consent agenda. After that, we will have executive session, and actually what I'd like to do, if there's no objection from any of my colleagues, is to move the executive session to the front of the meeting, as we do have an item we need to take up prior to our meeting. After that, after we come back and hear announcements, we'll adjourn our meeting. So if there's no objection, I'd like to amend the agenda to move the executive session up to right after we adopt the agenda. So is there a motion that we adopt the agenda as amended?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Hearing no discussion. Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you. The board will now recess into executive session.
I will move that we recess into
Ah,
executive
no.
session
Actually,
in
thank
accordance with
No, no.
law.
No, thank you, Mr.
But you're going to
Brown.
tell me the reason.
I'm going to ask
is
Ms.
it?
Gibbs actually to make a motion.
Oh,
and
I'm
then-
sorry. Go
then
ahead.
You're welcome to second.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Duly noted.
Thank
Ms.
you,
Gibbs.
President Baker. I move that we recess into executive session per section 121.22 G1, Ohio Revised Code, to discuss and consider the employment or compensation of public employees or officials.
Mr. Brown?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. Mr. Treasurer?
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Mr. Peretti.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
President Baker.
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you. The board will now recess into executive session. We will return to these chambers just as quickly as possible. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience, everyone, while we were in executive session. The chair will now entertain a motion that we recess out of executive session or come out of executive session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Peretti. Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Now we will move on to public comment. So we do have one individual signed up to speak this evening. Rules of speaking before the board: you will have 4 minutes. You will see a timer on the screen, and we will ask you to conclude within your 4-minute time period. The speaker is Michael Vanderdoes. Topic: religious music. Board action requested: reinstate the religious music policy back into the school. Mr. Vanderdoes, good evening. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Good evening, President Baker, Treasurer Bohoric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Superintendent Dr. Good. I'm here to speak about the inadvertent deletion of your policy on religious music. I was involved in the lawsuit that led to the settlement establishing the policy you left out. The plaintiffs were Columbus Public Schools students who had been discriminated against in a years-long pattern of almost exclusively performing Christian songs at all school vocal concerts and the performance of militantly evangelical Christian songs at graduation and other events. The evidence was damning. The settlement, while not as comprehensive as some plaintiffs would have liked, was sufficient to adhere to the principle of separation of church and state. Because the policy was left out of the Neola revamp, the board is in violation of the settlement. I can safely say those parties to the settlement who are aware of this situation are not happy about it and are in no mood to renegotiate. Inadvertency is no defense. When you inadvertently drive 50 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone, you are still speeding. From what I read in the newspaper, some of you wanted to open old wounds. Your comments showed a lack of understanding of the history of these issues in this settlement and an insensitivity to what led to the settlement in the first place. You want an exception for gospel music? It was a gospel song that brought the issue to a head. There are gospel music groups in Columbus schools for those who want to sing them. Are there klezmer bands? Are there nasheed choirs? If Muslims ask for a nasheed choir like the gospel choirs, are you going to be as encouraging as you are about gospel choirs? Would you tolerate a song at graduation exhorting people to follow Islam and and vanquish every foe until Allah is indeed king, like Stand Up for Jesus does for Christianity? Militant evangelical songs of any stripe have no place in the public schools. How would you feel if every song your daughter sang in choir all year long was a Muslim religious song? How would you feel if she was afraid to speak up for fear of being ostracized? How would you feel if she dropped choir because of this? In today's pernicious political climate, the federal government is attacking our civil liberties, promoting bigotry, ignoring the rule of law, and rolling back policies that protect our people. It is especially important for you here on the local level to protect the rights of minorities and to follow the rule of law in these times. I suggest you do the legal thing, do the right thing, and immediately reinstate the agreed upon policy and stop violating the settlement. I am informed recently that this should happen tonight, and we will all be very pleased if that happens. Perhaps you could even look at making the policy stronger to further protect the rights of the growing non-Christian population in our schools. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderdoes. Are there any clarifying questions from my colleagues? No problem. No question. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, and I do not believe we have any other speakers this evening. So we will move on to something that we arranged earlier with Mr. Vincent Clarno. Mr. Clarno, if you're in the room, would you just approach the podium quickly and ask you to talk a little bit about Terry Glenn? And Ms. Gibbs, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Mr. Clarno, and we're asking him to join us as our athletic director, to speak on behalf of our alum, Brookhaven alum Terry Glenn, who you may have known passed away unexpectedly this week. So, Mr. Clarno.
Good evening, Board President Baker, members of the board. I'm here to obviously just to share a few brief words about a young man who was taken from us all a little bit too soon. One of our former students here in Columbus City Schools. Terry was a 1992 graduate of Columbus Brookhaven and was an athlete who went on to find his way on the athletic field and able an opportunity to take those aspects of his life onto Ohio State and then on to the NFL for an NFL career. And ultimately, you know, I think as a city, when we hear these types of tragic moments, whether you're an individual in the public sector and public eye and public figure, or whether you're just one of our young people that we all know of, it hurts us all the same when we see one of our own who are taken a little bit too soon. So this was just an opportunity to say to all of those graduates of Columbus Brookhaven and who knew Terry and his family, that we in Columbus are also thinking about you in this tragic time, and are here to support those energies as you move forward to remembering Terry and him as your friend.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Clarino. It received a lot of media attention, but also they interviewed his former Brookhaven coach and many of the players and members of the community who are touched by him. So we normally do a moment of silence for all of our teachers and staff and people who we lost, but by far, Terry Glenn has impacted thousands of people here in Buckeye Nation, and I think he caught the first catch from Tom Brady in one of his games, and so we just really do extend our heartfelt condolences to the family and to all of the Brookhaven family that went to school with him. He graduated in my year, so we watched him and kind of grew with him through his career. So thank you, Mr. Clarino. Thank you, Mr. Baker, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clarino. Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. All right, let's move on then to our executive reports. So I will call on our superintendent. Mr. Superintendent, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Baker, members of the board. We're quickly moving into a season of traditions, and just yesterday I completed one of mine. As of yesterday, I've once again visited every school, clinic, office, kitchen, gymnasium, and every one of our classrooms across the district, all 111 buildings, plus 3 of our 4 bus garages and other non-student facilities to say hello to our children and adults and personally thank all of our personnel for their dedicated work. And I've repeatedly been impressed by the innovations in our classrooms and in our operations. Many people ask how I get to all the schools in just 3 months, and even more importantly, ask me why. And to the first question, I say it takes some very impressive scheduling, and I'm always appreciative of the administrative staff and the superintendent's office for supporting that. Second, I do it because I want every teacher, bus driver, custodian, instructional assistant, principal, every one of our staff members who I meet to have the same opportunity and obligation that everyone in this room has to be empowered and to empower our students more than ever. So when I make that personal handshake or hello, there's always a bond that says together, all of us in this district have the ability to be an educator, a counselor, a beacon of safety, and a champion for those we serve. Our families and our communities also play an important role in the empowerment of our students. I thank the board for joining me in enlisting the help of our families to reduce the potential outside threats that risk the safe and supportive environments we've established within our schools. Following up on a suggestion made by Board Member Gibbs, a letter was sent home with every student and was translated so that all of our families could understand its important message that safety is a fundamental priority here in Columbus City Schools. In this letter, we first asked families to dedicate time at home to talking very clearly and directly about items that are inappropriate to bring to school. Our Guide to Student Success makes that quite clear. Next, we shared that one of this district's greatest safety resources is the trusting relationships that have been built between our students, families, staff, and safety teams. We also asked our families to reinforce this commitment to see something, say something. And finally, we looked to our families to help us identify more of those partners in the community who could extend our safe zones and reduce incidents of violence in our neighborhoods. I know that students are kept most safe when we keep them engaged in safe locations during safe times of the day and on a never-ending path of education and personal growth. Recently, several individuals, community groups, faith-based organizations, city representatives, and Columbus Police pledged to work closely with our principals, for example, at Walnut Ridge and Sherwood Middle School, on coordinated neighborhood safety efforts. So I appreciate the work being done by principals such as Richard Stotts and Kevin Freeman of Walnut Ridge and Sherwood Middle School and their administrator teams for organizing those efforts. None of us can do it alone, and I know there are many who want to help. So this letter, like these words, are a call to action, and I hope and I thank the board for echoing that message. Next, we're also nearing the traditional time of year when students sleep with their pajamas inside out, inappropriately flush ice cubes down the toilets, or perform snow dances with their friends in the front yards, all with the hope that I might cancel classes because of winter weather. So this week, our communications team sent out reminders on how students and families can stay warm and informed this season when it comes to weather-related cancellations. And for the first time, this message was prepared in 5 additional languages, again, recognizing that in a growing number of our families, English is not the primary language spoken at home. We're encouraging more people to download the Columbus City Schools mobile app the first place where news about our snow days and other district-wide cancellations will be shared with instant messages to phones or notifications to mobile devices. There's also social media, the news media on TV and radio, and our auto dial phone system. Each one a valuable way to get information quickly when the district does have a weather-related cancellation. In this winter weather message, we also encourage families to have alternative plans for their child's day. Plans that are already set should there be no school. We need families to plan ahead for adult supervision if needed at home, to make certain there's food that students are able to fix safely, identify locations if a child typically goes to an after-school care program, and stock up on safe and engaging activities for children to do if they're at home for an unexpected amount of time. To help our families, we put this information along with some answers to frequently asked questions on our website, and you can just search weather. You'll recall that during the winter season last year, there were no snow days called. Perhaps in my final weeks as superintendent, I'll get another opportunity. That brings me to my final point. I want to applaud the board for your anticipated selection of an interim superintendent when my retirement begins at the end of December. When appropriate after your vote, I will join my colleagues in congratulating Deputy Superintendent Dr. John Stanford on this appointment. As I shared when I announced my retirement plans, our district is now on a sustainable, positive trajectory with the right people and the right processes firmly in place. John is familiar with the needs of managing Ohio's largest school district, and he will be surrounded by a strong and diverse leadership team at both the district and building levels. Together, they will continue to build upon the remarkable successes we've achieved and set the stage for a new superintendent to carry forward in his or her own style and leadership. As I shared with our teachers and staff yesterday, and they've heard me say it often as we've undertaken this transition, I am very, very proud of the work of our district and what they've accomplished, the families that we have served in every neighborhood, the partnerships we've built across our communities, and the empowerment and spirit of success we have instilled in our students that will last far beyond any of us. For me, it's one more thing to be thankful for as we enter into this season of traditions. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Any questions for the superintendent on his report? Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Let's move on then to our internal auditor. Internal auditor, have you anything to share with the board this evening?
Thank you, President Baker, Vice President Cole, members of the board. I don't have a report. I would just like to mention that the next audit and accountability meeting will be December the 11th. That is a Monday, which is not our typical day, at 3:30 in the cabinet room. We had to juggle some schedules to try to accommodate most of our members' schedules, so that's the date that worked out for us.
Very good, thank you. Any questions? All right, Mr. Treasurer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President Baker, Vice President Cole, and members of the board tonight. I'll be briefly reviewing the financial report for the month of October. Once again, our revenues this past month on a year-to-date basis continue to run slightly above plan, and expenditures are under plan. This report was reviewed by the Finance and Appropriations Committee last Thursday. We had several items on the agenda, of which this was one. I'll defer to Chair Peretti if you'd like to comment further about some of the items we discussed at that meeting. Highlights from that meeting in this report: property tax revenue, there's actually no change from the prior month. That variance continues to hold true, but there's no property tax activity until January. And it will be in January when first half collections begin, and we'll get a better sense as to whether or not this will carry through to the end of the year. On the state revenue side, this variance has jumped to about $5.7 million over plan for year to date versus $1.2 million, and that's because the October #1 payment was the first payment now that we've seen all the variables from the recently enacted the recently enacted state budget, are those variables now being calculated in. So what they do is they then do somewhat of a catch-up calculation as if you would have been receiving these payments all for the beginning of the year. So this bump this month will be evened out in the future months. To give you an example, the September #2 payment, which was under the old calculation, had a total state funding amount of approximately $328 million. The October one number jumped to $342 million, about $14 million more. And just coincidentally or very accurately, our spending plan, not only a monthly plan but our forecast, has in it for state revenue $341.5 $1.5 million. So rounding, we're right on target. So that's where it should be, and we'll see this variance work itself out over the coming months. Property tax allocation, I mentioned in the previous month, it was plus $3 million, but that was a timing issue, and as you can see in this report, that has resolved itself to where it's within $318,000 of the projection. So there's nothing else in the other categories that was noteworthy that we discussed at the meeting. Pardon me. Overall, the revenues are up about 6%, same as last month. With last month was about a $20 million favorable variance. This month at about $21 million favorable. Moving on to expenditures, personnel. We are in the process of implementing the increases that were called for in the recently negotiated collective bargaining agreements. And so we expect probably in January, again, to see, have a better projection as to whether or not on a year-to-date basis we're running true to plan. At this point, we don't see any evidence that we need to adjust our annual estimate in the personnel category. Purchase services dropped to about $1.8 million under plan from a little bit over plan. We didn't see anything noteworthy in there. We again think that's timing issues. Charter schools were slightly up over plan. They're at $671,000 versus about $217,000. But again, based upon the totals that the state's reporting to us, even after the October adjustments, we are still projecting to be within what we have in our plan and appropriation for the year. Supplies and materials continue to be somewhat of a conundrum for us. They continue to run under plan. Still, the same three categories are the contributors, main contributors, software, supplemental textbooks, and fuel. But we did notice that on a budgetary basis, they are encumbered. That is, purchase orders have been issued up to a sufficient level for this time of year. So we think again that planning is in place to make those expenditures, but it just hasn't happened yet. So that's a timing issue. Capital outlay, pretty much the same as last month, and this is a residual from the effective orders carried over from last year to this year. And other than that, there's nothing noteworthy on the expenditure side. Still 4% under plan. However, this 4% is about $12 million versus $7 million last year. So all in all, I think we're doing well. In the major categories in terms of revenue, property taxes and state revenue, and on the expenditure side, the major categories being personnel and charter school expenditures, we see nothing to this point that will affect our annual estimate in the plan or for the forecast. So that completes my report. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to attempt to address them this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions from board members? Board Member Gibbs?
Thank you, President Baker. In general, on page 5 in our expenditures year to date, we just have to get categories that says other and other uses. Just in a broad brush, what would fall under other?
Are you looking at the monthly summary, the management discussion analysis?
The former slide, expenditures year to date,
Oh, I'm sorry.
represent about,
Right here?
yes.
Okay,
No.
which category did you want? Other uses?
After capital outlay, debt, other uses, and
Other uses are like the transfers and advances, that category.
is that short for other, the one
And
next to it?
that's short because we plan on advances to other funds, and they just weren't required at this point. They weren't needed for other funds.
And this says other OBJ.
Other objects has to do with things like auditor treasurer fees. I have a lot of that category in mind. So those are pretty much running right on target.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the Treasurer on his report this evening? Hearing none, thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Let's move on then to board matters, and we have a few pieces of legislation we're going to contemplate individually this evening. 7.1 is the resolution appointing interim superintendent. And is there a motion that we...
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
All right, a lot of excitement around this one. Is there discussion? All right, seeing none. Mr. Treasurer?
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Without reservation.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you very much. Why don't we allow Dr. Stanford to share a few words if he'd like to?
President Baker, Vice President Cole, and members of the board, I am honored and humbled by your vote of confidence in me to serve as interim superintendent. Please accept my deepest and sincere thanks for this opportunity. I also want to thank my wife, Robin, and my daughter, Nia, who unfortunately were not able to be here with me tonight, for their support and love over the years. Additionally, I want to thank Dr. Good, our entire leadership team, and the countless dedicated team members across the district that have supported, encouraged, and provided a friendly smile every once in a while for me over the years when I needed it. Columbus City Schools is on the right path, thanks to Dr. Good. Yet we have some heavy lifting over the next few months. We will focus our efforts in these next few months on addressing our forecasted budget deficit and the shortfalls inflicted on us by the state of Ohio. We will continue the focus on increasing the graduation and student success rates. We will continue the all-hands-in effort to support our third graders to read on grade level. We will maintain safe, nurturing, supportive, and thought-provoking learning environments for our students. And last but not least, we will provide a smooth transition to a new superintendent. I plan to meet with our leadership team and our dedicated team members on the front lines and our stakeholders to solidify an agenda for the start of a new calendar year in January. As you can see, there are some heavy lifts ahead of us, but we have the largest number of hardest working educators and team members in Ohio, and they have my confidence and support that come January, we will work together to maintain and build upon the spirit of success in Columbus City Schools. Again, thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Stanford. And are there board members who might like to make comments? Mr. Brown?
Yeah, just very briefly, this board has very high expectations for the person who leads our district, even on a short-term interim basis. And we also have confidence in you, John, that you will meet and exceed those expectations. Thank you for your willingness to step up.
Well said. Mr. Peretti?
I just want to say thank you, John, for all your dedication and service over the years. You and I have known each other when you were in the Department of Education, and I remember working with you through the legislative process. And I just want to say it's always been an honor to work with you, and I really look forward to this opportunity not only for the district but for yourself. And I'm just kind of curious, are you and Dr. Good now switching offices? Now that we did this resolution now, or?
January 1.
Any comments from board members? Board Member Gibbs?
I echo the sentiments of many, Dr. Stanford, to say that we do appreciate your leadership and your willingness to take the helm and to transition us from this stage to next, and look forward to working with you as a partner, as a board, to make sure that we continue that spirit of success and ensuring that we achieve the mission at Columbus City Schools. Well qualified, well suited, well deserved.
If there are no other comments from board members, Mr. Superintendent, did you want to say anything? All right. Mr. Treasurer?
I'll just say I'm very excited to work with John. We've worked together in his current capacity, and he has my full support as he enters into this new position.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it. Now let's move on to item 7.2. This is second reading of policy updates, and I'm going to call on Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Before us for second reading are the omnibus amendments to the policies that we reviewed at first hearing recently. These policies are primarily updates. They've been reviewed and recommended by our staff. They have been reviewed and unanimously recommended by our Policy Review Committee. Most of these amendments reflect changes in federal or state law that have been recommended by staff so that people can search and locate information more easily. In light of the questions that were raised at the last meeting, just a few further comments specifically with respect to the religious music policy. Among the virtues of this policy on religious music is that it provides our students with classroom opportunities to learn about a wide range of music, which necessarily includes some religious music. It's among the great music of the world. And within this context of a classroom and an educational focus with the guidance of a professional educator. And I think that's good. Second, the policy, after very careful review, is recommended unanimously by the PRC. Third, the policy conforms to our legal obligations that arose out of the settlement some 15 years ago. And finally, at least in my view, this policy conforms fully to the First Amendment and to our constitutional law. With that, Mr. Baker, this concludes the second reading of the omnibus amendment, and I move for the adoption of this package.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your leadership via the PRC on this. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion on this omnibus piece of legislation before us this evening? Board members? Board Member Gibbs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I do thank and want to publicly thank Mr. Braverman. It took a minute, but he sent us the information in the case law, and I was able to read all of the information. So quite contrary to the way it was written, what I requested was additional information and a copy of, in fact, the settlements and the case law around the settlement and how we arrived at the policy. I still concur with all of my original thoughts in that in order to make a great decision, you should be as informed as possible as a board member. And none of us was on that board. That settlement was made under the leadership of Stephanie Hightower, Karen Schwartzwater, Andy Ginther, Bill Moss, Loretta Hurd, and Jeff Cabot. And those were the board members who served our district well and ushered in that settlement. But unless you were able to talk to the five of them, as two of them are no longer witness, you would not have had that context. I was able to get much more context and really do think it. I do still believe that as long as we have tests, there'll be a whole lot of singing and praying in schools, but as long as we adhere to this policy, we will uphold the guideline, and that our students are still free. As much as it is prohibitive, it is still permissive, and I stand by that, and have always believed it'd be a good policy, but to make sure that we stand in the now.
Thank you, Board Member Gibbs. And seeing no other comments, Mr. Treasurer, please call the roll.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Lord, yes.
That motion carried.
Thank you very much. Item 7.3 under Board Matters, colleagues, is a resolution in support of requesting the State Board of Education to grant a waiver for limited selective admissions, and this pertains to, as you know, Afrocentric Early College High School. So the board will, or the chair will entertain a motion that we adopt this piece of legislation.
Second.
That was a motion?
Excuse me.
Yes.
So moved.
Is moved and seconded. Is there discussion on this particular piece of legislation, board? Yes, Board Member Hudson.
Just a quick comment that I think for future reference of administration, I encourage looking to see if we expand the policy. The number, as I recall, it was a pretty low number once you got down to it, so.
Board Member Hudson, are you referring to the 20% versus, say, up to 50%? I think the superintendent may be prepared to comment on that.
And thank you, President Baker, to Board Member Hudson. We did inquire with the State Board of Education. They were not willing to entertain a proposal that was greater than the 20%, which was consistent with our other selective admissions. So we did follow up on your suggestion.
Thank you. We
Thank
should
you.
continue to encourage that state board to let them know we know what's best for our students.
Well said. Thank you, Board Member Hudson. All right, any other comments or questions related to that piece of legislation? Hearing none. Mr. Treasurer?
Mr. Ferretti?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
And that motion carried.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Let's move on now to contemplation of our consent agenda. Is there a motion that we adopt it as presented?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Questions on any piece of legislation contained within the consent agenda this evening? Board members, Mr. Brown?
I do. Specifically with respect to the large number of purchases of kitchen equipment. There's quite a few. I noticed that on, I think, virtually all of this, there were only 2 bidders. And generally, I guess my question is, why isn't there greater interest, which might lead to more competitive bids? I don't know that this is a highly specialized field, and thought that there might be greater interest.
Member Brown, thank you very much, Mr. Superintendent.
President Baker to Board Member Brown. I'm going to ask Maurice Oldham. I don't see. Oh, Joe is here. Joe Brown's back here. Well, is that all right to have Joe come up, or did you want to take us? Joe, you want to come on up?
Good evening, President Baker, Board Member Brown. I can't necessarily speak to why companies wouldn't bid. I can tell you that we encourage them to, and we want as many to, because we benefit by greater competition, and we recognize that. I can also share with you what we do to try to get as many companies to try to bid as we can. We advertise those bids in both the newspaper as well as a minority-based publication. We advertise those bids on a national database, public purchase, to try to get as many people to respond as we can. Any vendor who is registered in our system to be able to provide kitchen equipment, and there are quite a few, receives a notification from our Munis system saying that that bid is available to them. So I guess the bottom line is we agree with you. We encourage competition. We want as many to bid as possible. We separate that bid, and the reason there are so many is it was a large bid, but we separate every piece of equipment out so that if somebody has one piece and not another, they would have the opportunity to win on a line-by-line basis, which makes it more competitive and gives smaller companies a better opportunity. That being said, with this bid, we did only receive 2 responses.
Well, I guess from my perspective, if there are many other sellers out there in the market, we might want to take a look at, are we doing the right things? I appreciate those steps that you take, and those are great. But are there some different things that we might consider doing to get more competition?
We continue to explore different ideas. Like I said, we encourage that. we want that as well. So we will continue to work through that.
I understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Brown. Mr. Peretti.
Mine's more of a comment, and I guess more of reflection to a certain degree, and we're some things that we have talked about as a board. When I look at the facility management legislation, we're seeing a lot of Operation Fix-It dollars going to fix a lot of roofs. I love seeing that. I love seeing what we ask the public for and where our dollars are going to, as well as we're also seeing more shedding of property. Some of the work that was not directly a product of the levy, but was part of the levy planning and the work that Chair Gibbs and I did in updating our FMP plan so that we would be able to move in the future. And I guess I bring both these pieces up because as have evolved and grown as a board, over these last 4 years, we've seen a lot of changes. Specifically, I am talking to the facilities and financial pieces about being accountable, about being transparent. What do we have? What do we plan on doing? And our great team has been able to put together a budgetary process unlike any other. And it helps us look at what we're doing and what we're going to plan to do. I'd like to see us continue working on that. I see that we have some more areas where we can continue to do this sort of planning, and we have been talking about, what other pieces do we want to look at continuously. And one of those I would like to see, and I know we've been sort of having conversations on it, are what's going on in our facilities on an operational level. What sort of differences do we have in our buildings? What sort of general fund dollars flow those buildings for different energy purposes? What are the differences? So it'd be sometimes a good way to compare, and what are the pitfalls? And us putting together, a facilities operating budget that looks at not only what are the day-to-day different pieces that make up our buildings, what are the dollars that we'll be spending on through our capital dollars that we've requested, what do we plan on doing with our permanent improvement fund, how do we look at that going into the future. And those are sort of some things, some more filters for us, not only to keep on top of those sort of pieces of our district, what do we plan on doing in the future with them? So I look forward to us continuing to examine this, because facilities are going to be a really real issue going into the future. And we need to keep on top of that and make these processes permanent, so that when I'm gone or other board members are gone and we have new superintendents, there are certain things in place that are continued, whether it's financial, whether it's looking at finances constantly, whether it's constantly auditing ourselves, and what are we doing with our facilities, how can we continuously look at that. So that's why I wanted to make that comment, because I see all the progress that we've made, and I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind, that we have a lot of tough work ahead of us financially and coming to our buildings, and I'd like for us just to keep on top of that as a board, and that makes up the bulk of my comments.
Thank you.
So
Mr.
thank you.
Peretti. Thank you. Other questions or comments related to the consent agenda, colleagues? Ms. Gibbs.
Just want to thank the Hilltop Kiwanis for their donation to John Burroughs and for the books that they are going to give them. We always appreciate our community partners supporting our schools. So big thank you to the West Side.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Mr. Vice President.
Also want to thank the district and congratulate Miss Tawana Booker for her high school matriculation through our completion of the diplomas, for being acknowledged for that. That's an outstanding program. It's a wonderful opportunity for folks who are age 22 or older to utilize our services, our academic services, to acquire a GED or a diploma. I make use of this program for community residents in my nonprofit life in the Hilltop, and it served quite rewardingly for those folks who participated in that program. So thank you for this, and congratulations, Ms. Tawana Booker, wherever you are. Congratulations. Very proud.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Any other questions or comments from board members? Hearing none. Mr. Treasurer? Oh, I beg your pardon.
Just on the consent agenda?
Yes, Ms.
No, nothing more.
Okay, very good. Mr. Treasurer?
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Peretti?
Yes.
And that motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. We are now moving on to announcements. And Mr. Brown, do you have an announcement?
I do. I just got a little bit ahead of myself. The one item that I would like to mention, and I'm guessing that we all received invitations, but I don't know that because I got mine through my non-school email. Monica Kreidler and Momentum have a season of activities coming up at many of our schools. And she has done an incredible job with Momentum. First time I got to the big annual show that she does, I was just really impressed. And her ability to take all students, regardless of their level of skill or ability or coordination, and you know, create the artistic presentations that she does is fantastic. So I hope everybody has that list, or I'm happy to forward it. But it lists at least a dozen schools and places and times where there will be performances, and I would urge as many folks as possible to show up and show your support.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. I couldn't agree more. Any other announcements or points of pride, Mr. Vice President?
Just a very quick point of pride for the district hosting the Student Ambassadors Retreat that took place at Camp Wilson in Bellefontaine, Ohio. Very excited about the results and things that I heard about that retreat. My own child had an opportunity to participate in that as a student ambassador at her high school. So thank you for the staff that participated in that, and again for just even hosting this and giving students an opportunity to have efficacy in their schools and take their places as leaders.
Thank you. Ms. Gibbs?
Yes, thank you so much. Just a few announcements. First, want to welcome and thank the Education 101 class of Capital University and the 4 students that are here with us observing the school board. If you 4 students would please stand. Our future educators, thank you for being here. Oh yeah, they're first year students and they're here for a class to observe. I said, oh, what a wonderful day. Yeah, they get cameras and everything else. So thank you for joining us, and we wish you well in your career. Can't wait till we're approving you on our agenda as new hires. Can't wait. So thank you for being here. Secondly, had a wonderful visit to Buckeye Middle School last week. They were very energetic, very excited. Glad they had a day off after their little incident, but they're ready for a break, and they have an amazing school newspaper called The Paw. And if you get a chance, they're always looking for someone cool to interview. So I don't think I made the list, but they would love to speak to each and every one of you. They're aspiring journalists and really want to send a big shout out. Not many middle schools still have printed papers. Dispatch, if you're looking for some new team members, Buckeye may be brewing for you. And finally, the Innovation and Reform Committee will be hosting 2 site visits on November 29th. We will be visiting Central Crossing High School and Olentangy Orange High School. Those visits are about 8 to 11. 9:30 to 11, I get here 8. If you're interested in joining us on those sites visits, please give us a call or send us an email to, Dr. Stanford's email for now, or to Ms. Cherie Wells. Go onto the Innovation and Reform website and let us know. It's open to our committee members and board colleagues if any of you would like to join us as well.
Thank you, Board Member Gibbs. Mr. Brown?
Just very briefly, I just noticed on my calendar, and I'll be attending the Columbus Metropolitan Club Forum on the 29th, lunchtime, which is, this session will be on the unexpected face of homeless teens. It's clearly a significant problem in many school districts, including our own. And I think there's some good presenters, and it may be a good topic to learn more about.
For that. Anything else from my colleagues this evening? Mr. Preddy.
I just want to thank everyone, all of our staff, all of our community, and to have a very safe and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's nothing else, Mr. Superintendent.
Just thank you, President Baker. Just a couple piggybacks. One, just to put numbers with the face of homelessness, we have over 1,700 students who, by federal definition, are homeless in our district. So I think it is good to make certain that number is represented in that community forum on next week. Second is, you can be so very proud of our student ambassadors. I will tell you, it is the most miserable weekend I've ever spent outdoors. It poured down rain. It was incredibly windy. It was very, very cold. There was flash flooding, so much that we were actually, the students didn't even know that we were trapped in the camp because the roads had flooded to the camp entrance. And there was lightning and thunder such that we had to stop our outdoor games, but not one single complaint. And they are just marvelous ambassadors. I am so encouraged about our future because of the leadership, the stamina, the maturity that they represented over those 2 days. And of course, they did have leadership training as well. And so they will go on to do great things and will continue to represent the district well. I would like to take a point of privilege and invite Leslie Kelly to the podium to share an event that's coming up in just 2 weeks, a very important event. And I know many of the board plan to attend that event.
Thank you, Dr. Good, President Baker, Vice President Cole. I'm sorry, I have a cold. December 9th, we will have our 5th anniversary of our Family Literacy Numeracy Academy. It will again be at COSI, and today I had the privilege of trying out their new parking, which is underground. So if you came last year, it was a little slippery slide. Making up those sidewalks, won't have that issue this year. We are going to again have over 30 doing stations for families. So over 30 different stations for families to come to and do family literacy, numeracy activities with their students. We will have 6 different knowing sessions for families to come and learn how to really help their students. The theme, we're very excited about our theme this year, is same, but different. Really celebrating our differences and embracing our differences. Dr. Good is going to read the book, same, but different. And then we have our choir from Oakland Park that will be singing the song Heal the World at our family rally. And then we will get everybody off and to enjoy the day. We do have some great characters that are joining us, some of our storybook characters. Llama Llama, Red Pajama. So if you like the Llama Llama, he will be there. Piggy and Elephant, just to name the few. And one of my favorites, Jeannie B. Jones, will be there as well. So it's going to be a great day. Doors open at 8:45. And we will close the event at 1 p.m., but our families will have the entire day to spend at COSI. So we look forward to seeing you there.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
We'll be there. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Moved and seconded. All right. Well, on behalf of my colleagues, I just want to thank you all for being here and wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. And I'll ask the treasurer to call the roll.
President Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown. Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson. Oh, she left. My bad. Mr. Peretti. And Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
And despite all of that, the motion carried.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.
Mr. Peretti.